There are moments that fracture a life, not with a loud, shattering boom, but with a quiet hairline crack. It is a crack that starts in the heart and spiders outward, until the person you thought you were is a mosaic of pieces held together only by memory. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, that moment arrived on a Tuesday, 73 stories above the glittering chaos of New York City. My name is Evelyn Reed. At 52, I had come to understand that a mother's love is a form of currency, the only one you spend your whole life giving away, hoping it will be enough. I once worked with molecules and chemical bonds, things that were predictable, logical. I believed that for every action, there was an equal and opposite reaction. I had not yet learned that this law does not apply to the human heart. The restaurant was called The Summit. It was a place designed to make mortals feel like gods, surrounded by a universe of electric stars that was really just the city going about its business. I felt like neither. In a simple black dress that had seen better years, a relic from a different life, I felt like a ghost at the feast. The air was thin up here, filled with the murmur of money and the scent of expensive perfume. I sat at a table by the window, a small, quiet island in an ocean of ambition, invited by my children to celebrate big news. My children, Mason and Olivia. They were not my children anymore, not in the way a boy who scraped his knee or a girl who feared the dark were. They were adults, carved from a different, glossier stone than I was. Mason, at 28, wore a Tom Ford suit the way other men wore skin, effortlessly. He was the CEO, the visionary. His ambition was a furnace that I, his mother, had dutifully stoked with my own life's kindling. Olivia, 24, was a creature of the internet, an influencer. Her beauty was curated, her life a gallery of perfect moments for public consumption. She held her phone like a scepter, its screen reflecting the city lights back into her flawless face. They looked like stars, and I, their humble planet, simply revolved in their orbit. "Isn't this place incredible, Mom?" Olivia said, though she was looking at her screen, not at me. "It's beautiful, honey," I managed, my voice feeling as thin as the air. The first course arrived, a piece of art on a plate that I couldn't quite identify. We made small talk, the kind of conversation that fills space but never touches the soul. We spoke of the weather, of Olivia's upcoming trip to Bali, of the traffic. It was all a prelude, the polite throat clearing before the opera begins. And then it began. With the confidence of a man who had never known failure, Mason leaned forward, his hands clasped on the white linen. "So the news," he began, a practiced smile playing on his lips. "Aura Health is being acquired." He paused for effect. "PharmaCorp, the deal closes next month." He let the name hang in the air, a titan of the industry. "The valuation is $200 million. dollars. $200 million. The number wasn't just spoken, it was unveiled. It hung in the air above our table, shimmering, impossibly bright. My breath caught in my throat, tears, hot and immediate, welled in my eyes. It was the culmination of everything. Of a dream that had begun in a cramped garage, a dream I had watered with every last cent I had. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. Selling my parents' house, the one I grew up in. Packing away my mother's china and my father's books, each object a piece of my history, sold to fund a future I believed in. Cashing in my retirement account, the safety net I had painstakingly built, and handing it all, nearly $1 million, to my brilliant, promising son. There was no contract, no legal document. There was only a promise, made over a cheap kitchen table with tearful hugs and fervent assurances. There was only a mother's love. "Oh, Mason," I whispered, a hand flying to my mouth. "I'm so proud, I knew you could do it." He nodded, accepting my pride as his due. It's been a long road, but my joy, so pure and blinding, was about to be extinguished. Olivia set her phone down, a sign that the true purpose of the evening was at hand. She glanced at Mason, a silent, choreographed signal. "Mom," she said, her voice soft, dangerously gentle. "With this big change, we've been reviewing finances. And the thing is, the apartment you're in is a little expensive." I blinked, the happy tears turning cold on my cheeks. "Expensive?" Mason took over, his tone shifting from celebratory to clinical. It was his CEO voice, the one he used to make difficult, pragmatic decisions. "We've found a lovely senior living community for you out in suburban New Jersey. It's safe, quiet, and more importantly, fiscally more sensible. We need to cut any unnecessary expenses to ensure the acquisition goes smoothly. The world tilted. The glittering city lights outside the window seemed to blur and warp. Unnecessary expenses. Was that what I was? Cut expenses? I stammered, my heart beginning to pound a frantic, terrified rhythm. But what about my share, my investment in the company? I was your first investor, Mason. And then he laughed. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It was a sound of dismissal, a short, sharp bark that severed the last thread of the past. It was the cruelest sound I had ever heard. Mom, he said, shaking his head with a look of pity that scalded me. That was a gift. You gave me that money. There's no paperwork, no contract. You don't understand how these things work. He leaned back, the picture of magnanimous reason. Look at this as us taking care of you, ensuring you have a safe place to live without any burdens. We know what's best for you, Olivia added, her voice dripping with a false sympathy that was worse than Mason's outright cruelty. They spoke about me as if I weren't there. I was a line item on a spreadsheet, a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied up before the real celebration could begin. This dinner wasn't an invitation. It was an eviction notice served with a Michelin star. I sat there, frozen, amidst the clinking of glasses and the soft hum of conversations around me. I had sacrificed a career, a home, a future, all for them. I had given them the soil in which to grow their dreams, and in return, they had declared me a weed in their perfect garden. The crack in my heart had appeared, and in the profound, echoing silence that followed their words, I felt it begin to spread. I was no longer their mother. I was just an unnecessary expense. The city below was a galaxy of lights, but the only stars Evelyn could see were the ones that had burned out long ago. The sounds of the summit, the gentle clink of silverware, the low hum of self-important conversations, faded into a distant buzz, like a radio playing in another room. Her children's faces, once the anchors of her world, now seemed alien, their features blurred by the unshed tears in her eyes. Mason was explaining the logistics of her displacement, his words precise and unfeeling, but she wasn't listening. She was falling backward in time, tumbling through the years to a place where her life had been entirely her own. She saw herself at 30, standing in the sterile, sacred quiet of a laboratory. The air smelled of isopropyl alcohol and possibility. Dr. Reed, that's who she was then. Her world was one of molecules and microscopes, a place of elegant, beautiful logic. She was on the cusp of a breakthrough in cellular regeneration, a line of research that promised not to stop aging, but to heal the damage it inflicted. Her name was whispered in the hushed, reverent tones reserved for rising stars in the scientific community. Her future was a clean, straight line pointing toward discovery, accolades, perhaps even a footnote in the textbooks of the future. That woman, with her sharp mind and boundless ambition, felt like a stranger now, a character from a book she'd once read. That life ended not with a choice, but with a phone call. A policeman's voice, heavy with a practiced sort of pity, explaining that there had been an accident on the interstate. David, her David, the warm, steady center of her universe, was gone. Grief is not a single event, it is a landscape. For months, Evelyn wandered through its desolate terrain. The clean, predictable world of science had no formula to explain the gaping hole in her home, no equation to balance the sudden, crushing weight of single parenthood. She would look at her children, Mason, a quiet, serious 8-year-old trying to be the man of the house, and Olivia, a bewildered 4-year-old who still waited by the door for her daddy to come home, and she knew. She knew the straight line of her future had to bend. It had to curve around them to protect them, to become the fence that kept the world's wolves at bay. So she made the trade. She packed up her research, her ambitions, her name, and put them in a box in the attic. She traded a life of certainties for a life of maybes. She left the lab for the last time, the click of the door behind her sounding like a final, irrevocable full stop. She became mom. It was a role she embraced with the same fierce dedication she had once given her research, a new kind of science whose only goal was the successful cultivation of two small, broken hearts. The memory shifted, fast-forwarding through years of scraped knees, parent-teacher conferences, and teenage heartbreaks. It settled on another day, another choice. Mason, no longer a boy but a young man burning with an idea, stood in the living room of the house her parents had left her. It wasn't a grand house, but it was a vessel of memories. The pencil marks on the doorframe charting her height, the scent of her mother's rose bushes that still lingered by the porch, the worn armchair where her father taught her to read. A home is not four walls, but the stories they contain. It's a health app, Mom, Mason had said, his eyes alight with the fire of the truly convinced. It uses AI to monitor your vitals, predict health risks. It's going to change the world. But I need seed money, real money. She saw his potential. It was as clear and bright to her as a star under a microscope. He had her mind for logic and David's charisma, a potent combination. But she was just a part-time tech at a local clinic now, her savings modest. She had nothing except for the house. Except for everything. We'll be partners, he had promised, his hands covering hers. He'd spread a business plan across the familiar oak of the kitchen table, his finger tracing charts and projections. You'll be my founding partner. This isn't a handout, Mom. It's an investment. You'll never have to worry about a thing again. She remembered the real estate agent, a kind woman who didn't understand why she was selling. She remembered signing the papers, her hand trembling slightly as she signed away her past. She transferred the entire sum, along with her meager retirement funds, to an account named Aura Health LLC. It was an act of faith so total, so absolute, that it bordered on madness. She had pruned her own roots so that he, her perfect, brilliant son, could bloom. A waiter's hand suddenly appeared in her field of vision, clearing away the remains of her untouched appetizer. The motion startled her back to the present, back to the 73rd floor. Mason had finished his monologue. He was looking at her, expectant, as if he had just solved a complex problem and was waiting for applause. Olivia was scrolling through her phone again, her duty in the ambush complete. Evelyn looked at her son, at the man he had become in his expensive suit, and she saw the ghost of the boy in her living room. She saw the bright-eyed potential she had invested in. But the warmth was gone. In its place was a chilling pragmatism, a bottom-line mentality that had calculated her worth and found it wanting. The promise of founding partner had dissolved, replaced by the cold, hard reality of unnecessary expense. The uncashed checks drawn on an account of love had all just bounced. She looked from Mason's face to Olivia's, and for the first time in her life, she didn't see her children. She saw two beautifully polished, utterly ruthless strangers, and in their reflection, she finally saw herself, not as a mother, not as a scientist, but as a resource that had been fully and completely depleted. Of course, here is Chapter 3, continuing directly from the end of Chapter 2. Chapter 3, The Cold Silence. The ride home was a funeral procession for the family they once were. They sat in the silent, leather-scented interior of Mason's Tesla, a capsule gliding through the river of city lights. No one spoke. The declaration made at the dinner table was so absolute, so final, that words felt redundant. Mason drove with a focused intensity, his eyes on the road, having already moved on to the next item on his mental agenda. Olivia was illuminated by the soft glow of her phone, her thumb flicking across the screen, curating a reality far more pleasant than the one in the car. Evelyn sat in the back, a passenger in her own life. She watched the reflections of buildings warp and slide across the window, her own face a pale, translucent mask among them. She had been rendered a ghost by her own flesh and blood. When they arrived at her building, a sleek, impersonal tower of glass and steel, Mason didn't get out. He put the car in park. The real estate agent for the New Jersey place will call you tomorrow, Mom, he said, his voice as neutral as a GPS navigation system. Just be cooperative. It will make things easier. Easier for whom? She whispered, but he was already looking at his watch. Olivia didn't even look up from her phone. Evelyn got out of the car. She didn't say goodnight. The Tesla pulled away from the curb with a faint, futuristic hum, disappearing into the flow of traffic without a backward glance. Her apartment was beautiful. It was the kind of place featured in magazines, with floor-to-ceiling windows, white marble countertops, and art on the walls that was tasteful but said nothing. Her children had furnished it for her a year ago, an act she had then seen as one of generosity. Now, she saw it for what it was, a beautifully furnished waiting room. A place for her to be kept, neatly and quietly, until she was no longer needed. For the next week, silence was her primary companion. It was a living entity, humming in the hum of the stainless steel refrigerator, echoing in the vast, empty spaces between the designer furniture. In this silence, she began to understand the true nature of her new reality. She had not been a mother raising children. She had been a venture capitalist making a long-term, emotional investment that had been ruthlessly liquidated. On the third day, she gathered the courage to call Mason. The call went straight to voicemail, a cheerful, professional recording that felt like a slap in the face. A minute later, her phone buzzed with a text. Mason can't talk, in meetings all day. What's up? Her fingers trembled as she typed. Evelyn, I just wanted to talk about the other night. The three dots appeared and disappeared for a long moment. Mason, not much to talk about. The decision is made. It's for the best. Evelyn, it's not for the best, Mason. This is my life. Mason, Mom, don't be dramatic. I'm securing your future. You'll be taken care of. Did you look at the website for the community I sent? It has a golf course. He thought a golf course could fix a shattered heart. He was communicating with her as if she were a recalcitrant employee, not the woman who had held him through fevers and taught him how to tie his shoes. Each text was a small, digital stone, building a wall between them that felt higher and colder than the building she lived in. Her attempt to reach Olivia 2 days later was even more devastating. Olivia answered on the second ring, her voice a high, tinkling sound like glass about to break. Mom, hi, I can't talk long. I'm literally packing for Bali. The lighting here is just insane. My content is going to be amazing. Olivia, honey, I need to talk to you about what Mason said. A sigh, heavy with manufactured impatience, came through the phone. Ugh, Mom, can we not? You're really stressing me out. Mason is under like a ridiculous amount of pressure right now. This acquisition is everything. You should be thinking about him, about us, not making this all about you. Making it about me? Evelyn's voice cracked. Olivia, he is throwing me out of my home. No one is throwing you out, Olivia said, her tone condescending, as if explaining something to a child. We are relocating you to a more appropriate place for your stage in life. It's what responsible children do. Honestly, you should be grateful. Do you have any idea how much work it was to find that place? It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. In the space of 30 seconds, Olivia had reframed Evelyn's desperation as selfishness, her pain as drama, and their cruelty as responsible caretaking. She was the victim now, burdened by a difficult, ungrateful mother. I have to go, my Uber is here, Olivia chirped, her tone brightening again. Love you, the line went dead. The words, love you, so casually thrown, were the cruelest cut of all. It was a currency they had devalued through careless use, a word that now meant nothing more than goodbye. That night, unable to sleep, Evelyn found herself scrolling through Olivia's Instagram feed. It was a fantasy world of expensive brunches, designer clothes, and curated sunsets. And there it was. A photo from the dinner at the summit, the three of them, smiling for a selfie Olivia had taken before the truth had been served. Mason's arm was around Evelyn's shoulder. Olivia was making a kissy face. They looked happy. They looked like a family. The caption, posted just hours after they had left her on the curb, read, big things coming, but always making time for what matters most. Family over everything. Red hash, blessed hash, family first. The hypocrisy was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. This was their way. The public performance of love, the private execution of it. They weren't just taking her home and her money. They were stealing her story, rewriting it with smiling photos and hollow hashtags to present to the world. She was a prop in the perfect life they were building, and her role was now over. She turned off her phone and lay in the darkness. The silence of the apartment was no longer just quiet, it was the sound of erasure. It was the sound of a life's work, a life's love, being deleted, pixel by pixel, until nothing was left. Defeat has a physical form. It is the flat, folded shape of a cardboard box. It is the screech of packing tape being pulled from its roll. For Evelyn Reed, the days following Olivia's phone call were spent in the quiet, mournful ritual of surrender. She had gone online and ordered the boxes, and when they arrived, their presence in her hallway felt like an admission. They were cardboard coffins for a life that was still, technically, breathing. She moved through the apartment like a sleepwalker, her movements slow and heavy. Each object she picked up felt weighted with a history her children had deemed irrelevant. A small, chipped teacup from which she had given them warm milk. A stack of photo albums whose smiling faces now felt like a cruel form of fiction. She was meant to sort, to decide what to keep for her new, smaller life, and what to discard. But how do you sort through a life's worth of love? How do you decide which memories will fit into the space allotted for your future? The task felt impossible, so she started with the easiest place to pack, the small storage closet. It was a place of forgotten things, a closet of ghosts. In the back, behind a vacuum cleaner and a set of old luggage, was a single sealed box. On the side, in her own neat, academic script, were two words, Dr. Reed. Her breath hitched. She hadn't seen that box in years. She pulled it out, a plume of dust dancing in the afternoon light. It was a time capsule. Inside were not the sentimental trappings of a mother, but the tools of a scientist. Thick textbooks with underlined passages, journals filled with complex equations, and stacks of research papers bound with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. The smell of old paper and ink filled the air, a scent that transported her back to a world of logic and discovery. She ran her fingers over the cover of a biochemistry journal, her name listed among the contributors. This was a different version of herself, a geological layer of her identity buried so deep beneath the soft soil of motherhood that she had forgotten it was there. This woman did not weep. She analyzed. She did not surrender. She solved problems. For a moment, she felt a profound sense of loss for that woman, for the life she had so willingly given away. Lost in the bittersweet nostalgia, her fingers brushed against something hard and plastic at the bottom of the box. She pulled it out. It was an old USB drive, a clunky, transparent blue model from an era when a gigabyte of storage felt like a kingdom. A faded label, written in Sharpie, simply said, "Backup." Curiosity, an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time, stirred within her. She set the box aside and retrieved her old laptop from the same closet. It was a heavy, silver machine that took a full 5 minutes to grow into life, its fan whirring like an old man gasping for breath. She inserted the USB drive. The computer recognized it with a cheerful, antiquated chime. A single folder appeared on the screen, e-read archive. She clicked it. Inside were dozens of files, drafts of papers, datasets, lecture notes, and then she saw it, a subfolder named Project Aura. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She opened it. Inside were theoretical models, flowcharts, and a detailed proposal she had written for herself 2 decades ago, outlining a primitive AI system for predictive health analysis based on user-inputted biological data. The core logic, the very soul of the idea that was now worth $200 million, was laid out before her in her own words. She remembered, with a sudden, painful clarity, explaining it all to a fascinated teenage Mason who had sat cross-legged on the floor of her study, absorbing every word. But it was the other folder that changed everything. Email archive. She opened a file dated from 8 years ago, around the time Mason had started the company. It was a full backup of her email exchanges with him. She scrolled down, her eyes scanning the subject lines, and then she saw the one that made the air leave her lungs. Subject, the plan, our future. She clicked it open. It was a long, enthusiastic email from Mason, full of the boundless optimism of a 20-year-old on the verge of conquering the world. He had attached his first formal business plan. She read the words, her eyes devouring the text she had long forgotten. I know it's a big ask, Mom, taking all of your savings, but this is it. This is the one. I used some of the core logic from your old Project Aura idea like we talked about, and it's brilliant. It's the engine that will make this whole thing work. I've attached the business plan. Look it over, my founding partner. Let me know what you think. Your investment will be logged as 50% of the founding equity. We're going to do this. We're going to build an empire together. Evelyn stared at the screen. The words glowed in the dim light of the room. My founding partner, 50% of the founding equity. It was a fossilized promise, perfectly preserved in digital amber. It was not a legal contract, not something notarized and filed away, but it was proof. It was the truth, written in his own words, before the money and the ambition had poisoned him. It was a record of a promise made between a son and the mother he had not yet learned to discard. The trembling in her hands stopped. The tears that had been her constant companions for a week dried up. The fog of grief and helplessness that had clouded her mind began to recede, burned away by a cold, rising anger. She was not a charity case. She was not an unnecessary expense. She was a partner. She looked from the glowing screen to the cardboard boxes waiting in the hall. They no longer looked like coffins, they looked like kindling. The woman who had packed away her life was gone. In her place, sitting in the quiet darkness illuminated by the truth on a screen, Dr. Reed was beginning to remember who she was. She was a scientist, and she had just found her data. Sleep did not come. For Evelyn, the night was not a time for rest, but for transformation. She sat before the pale blue light of the laptop screen until the city outside her window began to trade its electric glitter for the soft gray wash of dawn. The anger she felt was not a hot, chaotic rage. It was a clean, cold flame, the kind that burns in a laboratory, precise and purposeful. It did not cloud her judgment, it clarified it. The grief had been a fog, but this anger was a lens, bringing the world into sharp, unforgiving focus. When the first rays of sun struck the top of the neighboring skyscraper, she rose and walked to the kitchen. She made coffee. The ritual was methodical, grounding. The whir of the grinder, the scent of the dark roast, the slow drip of water through the filter. Each step was a deliberate action, a reclaiming of control. She was no longer a ghost drifting through a life someone else had designed for her. With each sip of the hot, black coffee, she could feel Dr. Reed cementing back into place, piece by piece. She did not call Mason or Olivia. Communicating with them was pointless. They had already proven that they only heard what they wanted to hear. Instead, she opened her old laptop again and searched a name she had not typed in over a decade, Isabella Flores. The search results were immediate and intimidating. The first hit was the website for Flores, Choi and Associates, a boutique law firm with an address on Park Avenue. The website was sleek, minimalist, and radiated an aura of expensive, lethal competence. There was a photo of Isabella. Izzy and Evelyn felt a pang of nostalgia. The fiery, brilliant girl she'd known in their university debating club was now a woman with eyes that could dissect a legal argument from 100 paces. The headline beneath her photo read, Isabella Flores, specializing in intellectual property and corporate litigation. Evelyn picked up her phone. Her hand was perfectly steady. 2 days later, she was sitting in a leather chair across from Izzy in an office that felt like a fortress in the clouds. The view of Central Park from the 40th floor was breathtaking, a testament to the world Izzy had conquered while Evelyn had been packing school lunches. Ev, Izzy said, her voice a mix of warmth and professional assessment. God, it's been too long. You look like you've been through a war. The war is just beginning, Izzy, Evelyn replied, her voice quiet but firm. For the next hour, Evelyn did not present a plea, she presented a case. She laid out the story with the dispassionate clarity of a scientist presenting her findings. She spoke of her husband's death, the decision to leave her career, the selling of her home, and the total sum of her investment. She spoke of the dinner at the summit, her children's words falling into the quiet, sunlit office like shards of glass. Izzy listened, her expression shifting from the warmth of a reunion to the focused intensity of a lawyer. Verbal agreements, promises, they're tough, Ev, she said cautiously when Evelyn paused. A gift is legally a gift unless you can prove contractual intent. I know, Evelyn said, and then she took out the blue USB drive. But I have the data. She handed Izzy the drive. Izzy plugged it into her computer, and Evelyn guided her to the files. First, the project or a proposal with its dated schematics and theoretical models. Izzy's eyebrows rose. This is the framework for their entire platform. It was my framework first, Evelyn said. Then she directed Izzy to the email archive, to the specific email. Izzy leaned forward, her eyes scanning the text on the screen. She read it once, then read it again, slower this time. Her professionally composed face slowly tightened, the friendly warmth evaporating, replaced by a cold, controlled fury. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the screen. My founding partner, she read aloud, her voice soft but deadly. Your investment will be logged as 50% of the founding equity. She leaned back in her chair, a slow, dangerous smile forming on her lips. Oh, Evelyn, oh, you beautiful, brilliant, foolish woman. Is it enough? Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. Izzy's smile vanished, replaced by the look of a predator that has just caught the scent of blood. Enough. Evelyn, this is everything. This isn't just a family squabble over money anymore. This is a provable breach of informal contract. This is unjust enrichment. And with your research proposal as evidence, this is a potential claim of intellectual property theft of the highest order. They didn't just take your money, they stole your mind and built their empire on top of it. A wave of validation so powerful it almost made her dizzy washed over Evelyn. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't a bitter, delusional old woman. She was right. Izzy stood up and began to pace, her energy transforming the room. Okay, here's the game plan. We're not asking. We're not negotiating. We are going on the attack and we are going for the throat. First, we send a formal letter of claim and a cease and desist to Mason, the board of directors at Aura Health, and the legal team at Pharma Corp. Pharma Corp? Absolutely, Izzy said with relish. Nothing stops an acquisition faster than the threat of litigation over foundational IP and disputed ownership. We will inform them that the ownership of the company is currently under dispute and that any move to purchase its assets will be met with an injunction. She stopped pacing and looked at Evelyn, her eyes blazing. We are going to take a wrench and throw it into the gears of their $200 million machine. We are going to make it impossible for them to move forward without dealing with you. No more ignoring your calls, Evelyn. From this moment on, you are the most important person in their world. She buzzed her assistant. Sarah, get in here. I need to dictate a letter that's going to ruin someone's day. Evelyn sat back in the leather chair, the city stretching out beneath her. For the first time in a week, she wasn't looking down at the world from a place of fear. She was looking at it from a fortress. Izzy dictated, her words sharp, precise, and utterly ruthless. Each sentence was a weapon, each legal term a bullet aimed directly at the heart of the empire her children had built. When Izzy finished, she looked at Evelyn. Ready? Evelyn thought of the silent car ride, of Olivia's Instagram post, of Mason's dismissive laugh. She thought of the woman in the lab she had left behind. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. I'm ready. Izzy nodded to her assistant. Send it. Certified, all parties, effective immediately. The click of the keyboard as the assistant finalized the email was a quiet sound in the big office. But to Evelyn, it sounded like the first shot in a revolution. A legal document in the digital age is a silent sort of earthquake. It does not rumble or roar, it simply arrives. It lands in an inbox with a soft, unassuming chime, and then the world begins to shake. Mason Reed was standing in his corner office, a temple of glass and steel, looking down at the city he was about to conquer. He was on the phone with the lead counsel for Pharma Corp., his voice smooth and confident, finalizing the press release that would announce his triumph to the world. He felt invincible, a modern-day king surveying his domain. Life was a series of transactions, and he had just closed the deal of a lifetime. That was when his assistant, a perpetually nervous young man named Alex, knocked and entered without waiting for a response. His face was ashen. "Mr. Reed," Alex stammered, holding a tablet as if it were a venomous snake. "You need to see this. It was sent to you, the board, and to Pharma Corp's legal department." Mason waved him off, annoyed at the interruption. "I'm on a call, Alex. Sir, I think you need to end the call." The tremor of fear in his assistant's voice was enough. Mason ended his call with a curt apology and took the tablet. He saw the subject line, "Notice of legal claim and demand to cease and desist Aura Health Acquisition." He smirked, some small competitor, no doubt, trying a desperate, last-minute shakedown. He began to read, the smirk faltered. His posture, so relaxed and commanding moments before, stiffened. The legal jargon was dense, but the words at its heart were brutally clear. Foundational intellectual property, disputed ownership, breach of informal contract, 50%, founding equity doctor, Evelyn Reed, his mother's name. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was impossible. A fantasy, a joke. But the letter was from Flores, Choi and Associates, a firm known for taking scalps, not for playing games. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a hot, violent surge of adrenaline. The carefully constructed edifice of his success began to groan under the strain of this unexpected tectonic shift. He looked at Alex, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Get out." The moment the door closed, he stabbed at his phone, his thumb jabbing his mother's contact photo. She answered on the second ring. "What have you done?" He snarled, dispensing with any greeting. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke, her voice was not the weepy, emotional mess he expected. It was calm. It was controlled. It was the voice of a stranger. "I believe the letter is self-explanatory, Mason. The letter, that piece of paper is insane," he roared, beginning to pace his office like a caged animal. "You're trying to destroy me. After everything I've done, after building this from nothing, you want to burn it all down out of what? Spite?" "It wasn't nothing, Mason. It was built on my life savings. It was built on my ideas." "Oh, please," he scoffed, the sound dripping with derision. "That email, that was a joke from years ago. It's meaningless. You were a homemaker, Mom, not a founding partner. You have no idea what you're messing with." "Then I suppose your lawyers can explain that to my lawyer," she said, her voice still unnervingly level. "Her name is Isabella Flores. I'm sure your team can find her. Do not contact me directly again." Before he could unleash the torrent of rage building in his chest, she hung up. The dial tone buzzed in his ear, an insult layered on an injury. He stared at his phone in disbelief. She had never, in his entire life, hung up on him. The balance of power, a constant he had taken for granted since birth, had just fundamentally and irrevocably shifted. The aftershock arrived less than 10 minutes later, in the form of a hysterical call from Olivia, who was clearly at an airport, the chaos of boarding announcements echoing behind her sobs. "Mom is suing us," she wailed, her voice cracking with panic. "Mason, what is going on? My agent just called me. The story is starting to leak to the tech blogs. This is a disaster. This will ruin my brand. People will think they'll think we're horrible." "Calm down, Olivia," Mason snapped, his patience non-existent. "Calm down. My whole life is about authenticity. How am I supposed to be authentic when my own mother is telling the world we threw her out? This is a PR nightmare. Why is she doing this? She's selfish. She's trying to sabotage us." Mason listened to his sister's panicked, self-absorbed rant, and for the first time he felt a flicker of something other than anger, fear. Olivia was right. The problem wasn't the legal claim itself. That was just a negotiation, a matter of money. The real problem was the story, the narrative. A brilliant son and his stylish daughter, on the verge of a massive success, being accused of cheating their quiet, widowed mother. It was a story that was simple, powerful, and utterly ruinous. He ended the call with Olivia and immediately dialed his own legal team, barking orders, demanding action. But even as he did, he knew the earthquake had already happened. The ground beneath his feet, which had felt so solid just an hour before, was now fractured and unstable. The digital torpedo his mother had launched had hit its mark, and the shock waves were spreading faster than he could control. The battle was no longer a private matter to be handled with a dismissive conversation. It was about to become a very public war, and he had a terrifying premonition that it was a war he was not prepared to fight. In the modern world, war is not always fought with weapons of steel. More often, it is a war of narratives, a battle for the story. Mason Reed, for all his business acumen, understood this instinctively. After his initial, blind rage subsided, a cold, clear strategy began to form. He could not win a war of facts. His mother's evidence was a landmine in his path. Therefore, he had to change the battlefield. The fight would not be won in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. And in that arena, he had the perfect weapon, his sister. The conversation between them was a video call, their faces illuminated on each other's screens, two modern tacticians plotting their next move. A legal battle is messy and slow, Mason said, his voice stripped of all emotion. We need to control the narrative, and we need to do it now. We have to make her lawsuit look like a symptom of a problem, not the problem itself. Olivia, who had cried off her mascara in the hours after the first call, was now composed. Her influencer's mind, always attuned to the delicate art of public perception, immediately grasped the concept. So we're not villains, she said, her eyes narrowing in thought. We're the victims. We're the heartbroken children trying to care for a mother who is unwell. Exactly, Mason confirmed. Grieving, confused, easily manipulated. You're the one with the audience, Liv. You have to be the face of this. A flicker of something, perhaps excitement at the sheer drama of it all, passed through Olivia's eyes. This was not a family crisis, it was the role of a lifetime. 2 days later, the performance began. Olivia posted a video. It was not one of her usual slick, highly produced segments. The setting was her immaculate, cream-colored living room. The lighting was soft and natural. She wore a simple white cashmere sweater, her hair was slightly messy, and her face was free of makeup, except for the subtle glisten of what appeared to be tears in her eyes. It was a carefully crafted portrait of vulnerability. She didn't speak for the first 10 seconds, just looked at the camera, her lower lip trembling. Hey guys, she finally began, her voice thick with emotion. I'm coming on here because my family is going through something really difficult, and a lot of rumors are starting to fly around. She took a shaky breath. As many of you know, we lost our amazing father a long time ago. And my mom is the strongest person I know. But losing the love of your life changes a person. The grief, it never really goes away. It just finds new ways to show itself. She looked away from the camera as if collecting herself. My brother and I, we love our mom more than anything in the world. All we have ever wanted is to make sure she's safe and cared for. As our careers have become more successful, we've tried to give her everything. But lately, she's been confused, she's been unwell, and it breaks our hearts to say that she has fallen under the influence of people who do not have her best interests at heart. She looked directly into the lens, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. This lawsuit you might be hearing about, it isn't my mother. It's her grief. It's her confusion. It's predatory people taking advantage of her. Mason and I are working privately to get her the help she needs. All we ask is for your prayers and for your respect for our family's privacy during this unimaginably painful time. The video ended. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It never directly called Evelyn crazy. It simply wrapped her in a soft, suffocating blanket of pity and concern. The video exploded. It was shared, commented on, and written about across the internet. The narrative shifted with brutal efficiency. The headlines were no longer about a corporate dispute, they were about a family tragedy. The comment sections overflowed with sympathy for Mason and Olivia. So brave of you to share this, one wrote, sending love, it's so hard when a parent gets older. I can see the pain in your eyes. Stay strong. It was Izzy who showed the video to Evelyn. They sat in Izzy's office, the video playing on a large monitor, Olivia's tear-streaked face filling the screen. Evelyn watched the performance without a word, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. When it was over, she stared at the blank screen for a long time. The anger she had felt before was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching cold. This was a different kind of violence. Her children were not just trying to take her money, they were trying to take her mind. They were publicly declaring her incompetent, erasing her credibility, and painting her as a fragile, broken thing to be managed and pitied. They were using the memory of their father, the very grief that had led Evelyn to sacrifice her career for them, as a weapon against her. Then, her own phone began to ring. It was an old friend from her book club. Evelyn, dear, I just saw Olivia's video, the woman said, her voice oozing with a concerned sort of sympathy. I had no idea you were having such a hard time. If there's anything we can do, maybe you should listen to your children. They seem to love you so much. Another call came from a cousin in California, then another. They had all seen the play and they were all giving it a standing ovation. In the space of a single afternoon, Evelyn felt the world she knew shrink and turn against her. The story her children had crafted was powerful, simple, and far more compelling than the complicated truth. She felt utterly and completely alone. It was the most profound isolation she had ever known. She looked at Izzy, her eyes filled with a pain that went deeper than money. "She's telling the world I'm crazy." Izzy switched off the monitor, her expression grim. "No, Evelyn," she said, her voice hard as steel. "She's telling the world what she wants them to believe. They have made this a public fight for your sanity. They have shown us exactly how dirty they are willing to play." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with Evelyn's. "Now, we show them what happens when they go to war with a scientist who has all the evidence." The days following Olivia's video were a slow, grinding torture. The world, it seemed, had accepted her children's narrative. The sympathetic phone calls dwindled, replaced by an awkward silence from friends and family who no longer knew what to say. Evelyn felt the invisible walls of their story closing in on her, isolating her in a prison of public pity. She was no longer a woman fighting for her rights. She was a tragic figure, a case study in grief and confusion. "This is how they win," Izzy said, her voice sharp as she paced her conference room. They were surrounded by documents, the beginnings of their legal case spread across a vast mahogany table. "They can't win on facts, so they are trying to assassinate your character. They are trying to make you seem unreliable, unstable. A jury is made of people, Evelyn, and people are swayed by stories." Izzy stopped and looked at her, her expression intense. "We can't let their story be the only one. The email is strong, but it's his word against yours from years ago. They will paint it as a young man's hyperbole, a promise made in youthful excitement. We need more. We need to fight their fiction with facts so cold, so hard, that they cannot be spun." And so began the archaeological dig into Evelyn's own mind. Izzy's logic was sound. To counter the narrative that she was mentally frail, they would construct a meticulous timeline of her life's work, proving a history of brilliance and precision. The old blue USB drive became their primary artifact. Evelyn spent hours in Izzy's office, scrolling through her own past. It was a strange and painful process. She saw the ghost of the woman she might have become in the complex formulas and elegant hypotheses. She felt a kinship with this younger, fiercer version of herself. It was this woman, Dr. Reed, that her children were trying to erase. As she delved deeper into the Project Aura files, a nagging sense of unease began to grow. It was more than just the foundational idea that was familiar. It was the architecture. The way the data was weighted, the specific logic of the predictive models, it felt like reading a translation of a book she had written herself. "It's more than just the concept, Izzy," she said one afternoon, her eyes narrowed at the screen. "The way Aura Health's app supposedly works, the way it prioritizes certain biomarkers, it's the exact methodology I proposed in this paper." She pointed to a 20-year-old file. Mason was never a biochemist. He couldn't have come up with this level of detail on his own. Izzy's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. She picked up her phone. "I think it's time we brought in a specialist." The specialist was a man named Ben Carter, a forensic software engineer who looked more like a perpetually exhausted graduate student than a legal shark. But his reputation was legendary. He specialized in finding the digital ghosts in the machine. They sat in the conference room, the air thick with anticipation. Izzy had given him Evelyn's files and all the publicly available technical specifications of the Aura Health platform. Ben worked in silence for nearly an hour, his fingers flying across his keyboard, his eyes darting between two screens. One displayed Evelyn's old academic code, the other, a deconstruction of Aura's known architecture. Finally, he leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. "Well," he said, his voice flat, "this is brazen." "What did you find?" Izzy asked, leaning forward. "It's not just inspiration," Ben said, turning his screen for them to see. "Inspiration is when you see a car and decide to build your own. This is different. Mr. Reed didn't build his own car. He stole his mother's engine, chassis, and transmission, then gave it a shiny new paint job and put his name on the hood. He pointed to a section of code on Evelyn's screen. This string here, it's a unique algorithm for calculating the predictive weight of certain protein markers. It's highly idiosyncratic. It's like a writer's specific turn of phrase. It's her signature. He then pulled up a technical analysis of the Aura app. And here it is, the same signature, the same idiosyncratic logic buried deep in the core of his platform. It's been updated, optimized for modern systems, but it's undeniably the same intellectual DNA. Evelyn felt the room go cold. This was a betrayal on a level she had not even allowed herself to imagine. It was a theft not of money, but of thought, of self. Ben wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, his voice hushed with a kind of professional awe. "Your original code, Dr. Reed, you embedded non-executable comment lines, notes to yourself." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I always did, to remind myself of the theorem it was based on." "Well, your son's programmers were either lazy or just not very good," Ben said. In an early, pre-release version of their code that was archived online, they stripped out most of the comments, but they missed one. He highlighted a faint, grayed-out line of text deep within the Aura code. It read, //ref, Reed-Katz theorem, 1998. The Reed-Katz theorem was a minor, obscure theorem Evelyn had co-authored in graduate school. It was the mathematical foundation for her entire predictive model. There was no conceivable reason for that reference to be in Mason's code unless he had copied the source material directly. It was a fingerprint on the murder weapon. After Ben had packed up and left, Evelyn and Izzy sat in the silent room. The weight of the discovery was immense, suffocating. The story was no longer about a mother asking for her promised share. It was about a son who had committed the ultimate academic and intellectual sin. He had plagiarized his own mother's soul. Any lingering shred of maternal sentiment, any vestige of hope for a future reconciliation, turned to dust and blew away. The fight was no longer about money. The $200 million felt like a trivial sum, an insult to what had truly been taken. Evelyn looked at Izzy, her face a mask of cold, devastating clarity. "He didn't just take my investment, Izzy," she said, her voice quiet but heavier than stone. "He took my work, he took my legacy." She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. She was no longer fighting for her past. She was fighting for the ownership of her own mind. The discovery of the stolen algorithm was not a cannon blast, but the quiet, decisive click of a key turning in a lock. A lock that, once opened, could never be shut again. Izzy's follow-up letter to the opposing counsel did not contain threats or emotional appeals. It was a sterile, factual presentation of the forensic software engineer's report, complete with screenshots of the identical code and the damning, time-stamped reference to the Reed-Katz theorem. The response was no longer silence, it was panic. Within hours, a call came not from Mason, but from his lead attorney, a man whose voice was a smooth, expensive purr of damage control. He requested an emergency mediation session. A final attempt, he said, to resolve this unfortunate family matter before more permanent damage is done. "They're bleeding," Izzy told Evelyn over the phone, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "PharmaCorp is getting cold feet. The threat of acquiring a company with fraudulent intellectual property is a billion-dollar headache they don't want. We have them pinned, Ev. Now, let's go hear what they have to say." The meeting was held in a neutral space, a vast, soulless conference room on the 50th floor of a glass tower in Midtown. The room was designed to be devoid of personality, a zero-gravity chamber where emotion had no weight, only legal arguments. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the gray, overcast sky. It felt less like a negotiation and more like the partitioning of a defeated country. Evelyn and Izzy arrived first. Evelyn wore a simple, dark gray suit. She felt calm, her anger having cooled into something harder and more durable, resolve. She was not here to plead or to rage. She was here to listen, to observe, and to deliver a verdict. Mason and Olivia arrived next, flanked by a team of 3 lawyers. They did not look like the confident, conquering heroes from the restaurant. They looked like defendants. Mason's jaw was tight, his face a mask of controlled fury. He refused to meet Evelyn's eyes. Olivia, for once, was not on her phone. She sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap, her face pale beneath its perfect makeup. She radiated a resentful sort of martyrdom, the aggrieved party forced to deal with an unreasonable hysteric. The final person to enter the room was a stone-faced woman in her 60s who introduced herself as the general counsel for Pharma Corp. She did not smile. She was not here for family drama. She was here to protect a $200 million investment from imploding. The head of Mason's legal team, a silver-haired man named Marcus Thorne, began the proceedings. His voice was a soothing balm intended to lower the temperature in the room. "We are all here," he began, gesturing magnanimously around the table, "to find a path forward. Litigation of this nature is often destructive, benefiting no one, least of all a family. The accusations, while we believe them to be unfounded and based on a misunderstanding of the collaborative nature of innovation, have nevertheless caused a significant disruption." Evelyn remained silent, her expression unreadable. Izzy simply listened, a faint, Mona Lisa smile on her face. Thorne continued, directing his words to Evelyn. "Mrs. Reed, your children, despite the pain these public allegations have caused, still hold a great deal of love and respect for you. They have always wanted to ensure your comfort and security. It is in that spirit that they have instructed us to make a final, comprehensive offer to resolve this matter, allowing everyone to move on with their lives." He slid a leather-bound folder across the polished table. Izzy didn't touch it. "The offer is this," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a confidential, impressive tone. "A one-time, tax-free payment of $10 million. Additionally, a trust will be established in your name, with a further $5 million to be managed on your behalf, providing a generous income for the rest of your life. All we require in return is that the current lawsuit be dropped, all claims to ownership or intellectual property be waived, and a non-disclosure agreement be signed by all parties." $10 million. The number was obscene. It was a life-altering, world-changing sum of money. It was a golden cage, offered to her with the expectation that she, the simple, grieving mother, would be dazzled by its shine and gratefully accept her comfortable confinement. Mason finally spoke, his voice strained. "It's a more than generous offer, Mom. It's enough for you to do whatever you want, to be secure. It's what you should have let us do for you in the first place." His words were not an apology, they were a rebuke. He was still the victim, magnanimously offering a fortune to the person who had tried to ruin him. Olivia added her part, her voice quivering slightly. "We can put this all behind us. We can be a family again. Isn't that what's most important?" Evelyn finally turned her gaze to her daughter. She saw the performance, the desperate plea for a return to a status quo where Evelyn's role was to be silent and grateful. She had seen this play before. The room fell silent. The lawyers looked at her, expectant. The woman from PharmaCorp tapped her pen impatiently on a legal pad. The $10 million question hung in the air. Marcus Thorne leaned forward, his professional smile firmly in place. "So, Dr. Reed," he said, using her old title as a form of placation, "I believe this is an offer that satisfies everyone's needs. Do we have an agreement?" Evelyn looked past the lawyer, past the money, past the leather-bound folder that contained her gilded cage. She met the resentful, unrepentant eyes of her son, and then the fearful, manipulative eyes of her daughter. She held their gazes for a long, silent moment, letting the full weight of their betrayal, their lies, and their utter lack of remorse settle in the quiet room. She took a slow, deliberate breath, and then she began to speak. Evelyn looked past the lawyer, past the money, and met the resentful eyes of her son. She took a slow, deliberate breath, and then she began to speak. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it filled the cavernous silence of the room, each word carefully weighed and placed. "Mr. Thorne," she began, addressing Mason's lawyer but never taking her eyes off her children. "Your offer is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. You believe this is a transaction about money. You are trying to solve the wrong problem." She leaned forward slightly, a professor about to begin a lecture. "Let me tell you a story about a theorem. It's called the Reed-Katz theorem. It's an obscure piece of academic work in biochemistry I co-authored in 1998. It proposes a mathematical model for predicting cellular degradation based on specific protein markers. It's elegant, it's complex, and it was, for a time, my life's passion. Mason shifted in his chair, a flicker of unease crossing his face. The woman from PharmaCorp had stopped tapping her pen. The theorem, Evelyn continued, her voice even and methodical, became the basis for a private research project I called Project Aura. I theorized that this mathematical model could be the engine for a piece of software, an application that could, with remarkable accuracy, predict personal health risks. It was a beautiful idea, an idea I foolishly shared, out of love and pride, with my technologically gifted son. As she spoke, Izzy Flores, without a word, connected her laptop to the large monitor at the end of the room. The screen lit up, displaying two columns of code side by side. On the left, a file from Evelyn's USB drive, dated 2002. On the right, a forensic deconstruction of the core algorithm from the Aura Health app. You see, Evelyn said, gesturing to the screen, an idea is one thing, but an algorithm is a piece of architecture. It is a blueprint, and as you can see, the blueprints are identical. Marcus Thorne and his legal team leaned forward, their eyes scanning the screen, their professional composure beginning to fray at the edges. But sometimes, Evelyn said, her voice dropping, a thief is careless. He might steal the blueprints, but he forgets to erase the architect's signature. Izzy's finger tapped a key, and a single line of grayed out text was highlighted in bright red in the column of Aura Health's code. It glowed in the dim room like a confession. //ref, read Katz's theorem, 1998. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the lawyer's side of the table. The room was utterly, devastatingly silent. The digital ghost of Evelyn's past had just materialized to testify against her son. That, Izzy said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, is not collaboration. It is not inspiration. It is direct, provable, and willful intellectual property theft. It is fraud. The woman from PharmaCorp made a quiet sound, a noise of pure disgust, and snapped her leather-bound notebook shut. This meeting is over, she said, her voice tight with fury. PharmaCorp will be formally withdrawing its acquisition offer, pending a full internal investigation into this fraud. She stood, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. You'll be hearing from our legal department, Mr. Reed. You all will. She walked out of the room without a backward glance. The dam broke. This is insane, you're lying. Mason exploded, jumping to his feet. His face was blotchy and red, his CEO's mask completely shattered. You're twisting everything. Those were just ideas, notes, things you gave me. I gave you my love, Mason, Evelyn said, her voice still quiet, an island of calm in his storm. I gave you my home. I gave you my savings. I did not give you my mind. You took that for yourself. This is what you wanted, isn't it? He raged, his voice cracking. He wasn't speaking to a business adversary. He was screaming at his mother. To sabotage me, to ruin me because you were jealous you never did anything with your own life. The cruelty of the accusation after everything was breathtaking, but it no longer hurt Evelyn. She simply looked at him, at the frantic, cornered man her son had become, and she felt a profound, bottomless pity. That's enough, she said. The two words were not shouted, but they carried an authority that silenced him. He sank back into his chair, breathing heavily, defeated. Evelyn stood up. She was in command now. The room was hers. I will say this once, she announced to the stunned audience. This was never about your $10 million. That money is an insult. This is about my work. She looked directly at Mason's lead lawyer. The acquisition, or any future sale of this company, will not proceed. Everything will be frozen by an injunction, and we will proceed with a lawsuit for intellectual property theft that will bankrupt your client and likely lead to criminal charges, unless two things happen. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. First, a public, formal, and unequivocal statement will be issued by the company, acknowledging that the foundational technology for the Aura Health platform was conceived and designed by Dr. Evelyn Reed. Second, she continued, her gaze shifting to her son, the corporate structure will be reformed. I will be instated with a 51% controlling interest. I will take a seat on the board, and I will head the new division of research and ethical development. She let the terms hang in the air, so audacious, so absolute that no one even breathed. This is not a negotiation, she finished, her voice as hard and as brilliant as a diamond. This is not an offer. It is a statement of incontrovertible fact. My name will be on my work. That is the price of your survival. 1 year later, the world looks different when you are standing on ground you have fought for and won. From the window of her office, an office she had designed herself, with warm wood, shelves of books, and living plants, the city was no longer a glittering symbol of her exclusion. It was a landscape of possibilities, a place where she belonged. Dr. Evelyn Reed was home. The nameplate on her door did not say CEO. It said, Head of Research and Ethical Innovation. It was a title she had created for herself, a role that fused the two halves of her life, the meticulous scientist and the compassionate human being, into one. Her lab, visible through a large glass wall, was a hive of bright, energetic activity. Young scientists, the best and the brightest, scribbled on whiteboards and debated complex theories, their passion a familiar and welcome music to her ears. Her victory in that sterile conference room had been absolute. Faced with irrefutable proof of fraud and the immediate collapse of the Pharma Corp deal, Mason and his board had capitulated completely. The new corporate structure was formed, public apologies were issued, and the narrative, once a weapon used against her, was now corrected in the stark, unspinnable language of press releases and SEC filings. Dr. Evelyn Reed was acknowledged as the architect of Aura Health. The story was set right, but a corrected story does not always heal the book's torn pages. Her relationship with her children was now a quiet, carefully managed landscape of its own, marked by scarred terrain and distant horizons. Mason was still at the company. He was the chief technical officer, a title that sounded important but lacked the power he craved. He was brilliant, she could not deny that, and he knew the technology better than anyone. But he now reported to a board that she controlled. Their weekly meetings were professional, efficient, and devoid of warmth. They spoke of data points and development cycles, never of the past. She would look at him across the boardroom table and see a man trapped in a prison of his own making, surrounded by the fortune he'd so desperately wanted, but stripped of the glory he'd needed more than air. He had the money, but he had lost the empire. Olivia had drifted further away. With her primary source of funding cut off, and the story of the lawsuit tarnishing her carefully curated brand of authenticity, her influencer career had faltered. She had been forced to trade the fantasy of a Bali-sponsored lifestyle for the stark reality of a 9-to-5 marketing job. She sent Evelyn polite, infrequent text messages on birthdays and holidays, each one a small, sad echo of a connection that had been severed. Evelyn knew that Olivia would likely never understand the depth of her own betrayal, seeing the outcome only as a personal loss, a punishment that had cost her the life she felt she deserved. There was a sadness in it all, a quiet ache that Evelyn knew would likely never fade. A mother's love, she had learned, does not simply switch off, but it could be transformed. Her love was no longer a blind, all-consuming fire. It was now a distant, watchful light, one that acknowledged the truth of who her children had become. They were a beautiful vase that had been shattered, and though some pieces could be glued back together, the cracks would always show. A young researcher knocked on her open door, her face bright with excitement. Dr. Reed, the preliminary data on the Alzheimer's predictive model is in. The accuracy is, well, you need to see this. A genuine smile touched Evelyn's lips. This was her real legacy. Under her guidance, Aura Health was pivoting. It was moving beyond lifestyle wellness and into the deep, meaningful work of early-stage disease prediction. She was using the engine he had stolen to do the work she had always dreamed of. She was not just reclaiming her past, she was building a better future with it. She walked into the lab, the young scientists gathering around her, their faces turned to her with respect and anticipation. She looked at the complex data on the screen, a language she understood better than any other, and felt a sense of peace that no amount of money could ever buy. She had lost a family, the one she thought she had, but she had found a purpose. And in doing so, she had finally completely found herself. She was not a victim, not a ghost, not an unnecessary expense. She was the architect, and this was her dawn. Thank you for taking the time to follow Evelyn's story. It is a reminder that strength and purpose can be found at any stage of life, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of finding the light. I wish you all good health, and for you and your families, a future filled with happiness and love.